Good morning, everyone, and thank you everyone for joining us today on an ARO webinar that we are calling Intelligence to Action. Just for a brief introduction for those people that I haven't yet met. So my name's Adam Butler. I'm the Principal Cyber Solution Architect at ARO. Been in the organization now for about 2 years, but been in IT and cyber for about 20 of those, specializing in cyber defense and response. If you're familiar with the concept of red teaming and blue teaming, I sit somewhere, I guess, in the purple space. So understanding ultimately what the bad guys are doing and then helping organizations to defend themselves. Quick introduction to ARO. So again, not sure who's familiar with ARO in the call, but we're a UK leading technology company. We specialize in collaboration, cyber and IT, data center, and we have organized offices based across the whole of the UK. I'm from sunny Leeds up in the north, where our cyber division is, and you can kind of see some of the accreditations that we've got there. But without further ado, I will get into what we're looking at today. So again, for you that have seen the agenda, just a recap. So we're going to look at the evolving threat landscape. So a look back at the last year and the top level details associated with that. Emerging trends and tactics, so what we're seeing and what's changing. AI in cybersecurity. AI is obviously a massive buzzword right now. AI is being used on good side and the bad side. So yeah, what are the risks and what are the real world implications of that? Defensible by design, so basically utilizing frameworks to help you understand your organization, what your posture looks like, and more importantly, what your gaps are. Then lastly, looking ahead and call to action, some of my predictions and some calls to action from some of the things we're going to discuss today. Cool. So we're going to start with the evolving threat landscape and a look what the data is saying. So I just want to promise now that this isn't just going to be a stats heavy presentation, but it's something that we do need to look at. We need to look at the top line for what's going on in the UK. So I've taken a focus on the left-hand side of the screen of kind of general stats. And then on the right-hand side, we're looking at ransomware, because ransomware, I guess, is the boogeyman. It's the thing that most people are afraid of and what people want to talk about. The second thing that I want to highlight on this is that the data that I've collected here is all reportable data. So actually, a lot of this, a lot of things don't get reported. So what you're seeing here is only what is reported. So the stats are probably a lot worse, which is a scary thought, to be honest. So starting with the prevalence, around half of UK businesses and a third of charities have experienced some form of cyber breach in the last 12 months. I think the last part of that is a scary point for me. If you think about the facts of charities and what they do for society, to understand that, if your moral compass is way down south, that you can now, they're being attacked. Less surprising is that there's higher rates in larger organizations. The size of the organization usually kind of translates to the amount of money that they turn over. And as a lot of these criminal gangs are looking to make money, the larger organization, the more likely they are to get some sort of payout. So we see medium businesses having 70%, larger businesses 74%, and high income charities having 66%. Most common threat, phishing attacks. This has been around for a long time here, affecting 84% of businesses. I'm sure everyone on this call has seen some sort of phishing attack, someone spoofing, an employee or a service at some point, and that was closely followed by unpatched vulnerabilities. I know everyone gets very excited about 0 days, but if you think about 0 days that typically used by nation states, who wouldn't use that for attacking your organization, but we have had some cases, WannaCry, for example, where North Korea obviously was behind that attack, and ultimately that was impacted the NHS. Preparedness is the one bit that is a little bit better for us. So we're seeing that, this is improving. So we are starting to look at this. And the interesting thing for me is that only 31% of businesses and 26% of charities were conducting some form of a cyber risk assessment in the last year. Now, moving to the right, focus on ransomware. Obviously, as I mentioned, ransomware is really big, and we will talk about this as I go through the presentation. But over 50% of UK companies report experiencing some form of a ransomware attack. Now, how far that got in the escalation is obviously going to differ, but 50% of UK businesses having that is obviously not a good statistic. Financial consequences, obviously I've picked a bad one here, but Synovis, who was a laboratory service provider for the NHS, had a loss resulting in 32.7 million. What's happening, obviously, is the threat actors are getting more sophisticated. We're seeing things at the moment where they're impersonating IT support. They're moving away from just using emails, so we're seeing Teams as a means to get in entry, and they're convincing people to give them remote access. Uber and some of the other breaches that you're probably familiar with were exactly using that method. And lastly, the NCSC reported this 16% increase in cyber incidents in 2024, and ransomware has been identified as the most immediate threat to critical infrastructure. So I guess to summarize where we're at the moment, the volume and severity of cyber attacks is continuing to rise year on year, and there's no signs of slowing. Now, I've put here a stat about mean time to detect. So just to explain that a little bit, mean time to detect is the time it takes for you to detect something bad happening in the organization. So let's just say I jumped onto your organization and deployed something right now. If it takes you 3 weeks to establish that bad thing has happened, that's the mean time to detect. Now, the stat for the UK, which is based on the average, is somewhere between 197 and 270 days, which is a horrendous stat. So really now we need to be more proactive than ever in this detection pace, because obviously we need to reduce that down. The only thing that I'm seeing on those statistics is that people are starting to take note of this now, but the bad guys are winning. So as my 5-year-old likes to ask me quite often, why? Why is this happening? Why are attacks more frequent? Why is the trend going upwards? Why are we not starting to win the fight now? Well, I'm sure people will remember COVID, and you can think back to then. At the time, I worked in a secure operations center, and a lot of my customers, who were told to go and work from home, they just didn't have the infrastructure to kind of make that work. The firewalls, the VPNs were set to have, hundreds of employees working from home. So we have this springboard into hybrid cloud, hybrid workforces, cloud adoption, bring BYOD. Ultimately, we've created more endpoints, we've created more opportunities. We've got more sophisticated threat actors, and again, I'll talk about this further in another section, but we've got ransomware as a service now. So we've got these high-level tools that are being made available to low-skill actors. We've got exploitations of known vulnerabilities. People who are maybe Cyber Essentials Plus certified in here are probably doing a good job with this. You've got 14 days, but it's still a common thing. And as soon as something becomes a proof of concept, the attackers are scanning and pouncing on that. We've got this lower barrier to entry. We talk about to work in defense, you kind of have to understand quite a lot to be able to defend. But on the attacking side, they've got phishing kits, they've got malware, they've got AI-generated scans. You can get just about anything as a service. Ransomware as a service, I'm talking about a lot today, but you can buy phishing as a service as well, where you get customer success managers, credits, and they'll make sure that your attacks are bypassing the systems. Of course, there are economic drivers. Cybercrime pays, and again, I'll talk about that later. Ransomware, data extortion, credential theft is all profitable. And lastly, that delayed detection. Many threats are going, undetected for days or weeks. Now, as I started to write this, and I'm sure other people are looking at the news, a few things had happened over the last month. So obviously Marks and Spencer's, we had Co-op, Harrods, and then I think 2 weeks ago we had a significant amount of private data stolen and legal aid hack. Now, what I'm not doing is jumping on the bandwagon here and saying, hey, if you'd have had my stuff, this is how we'd have defended you from that. But what I did want to kind of realize, or get you to think about, is that when I speak to people that maybe don't work in this industry, friends, family, that kind of thing, I'm in a position now where people in the public are awake to cyber, right? They're seeing this in the public, it's hitting us, and we are now getting this concern coming back to the home, and it's not just in the office life. Now, what do we know from these attacks? And again, this is all we know at the moment. I don't want to speculate on anything else. But what we believe is from Marks and Spencer's that the attackers impersonated an IT support personnel of a third-party provider, so a supply chain compromise attack, to deceive employees into providing them system access. The two groups that have been associated with this, so threat actors like to have interesting names, should we say. So we've got Scattered Spider, who are a sophisticated cybercrime group known for social engineering, SIM swapping, and breaching large organizations. And then we've got Dragon Force, who are effectively a hacktivist group, an activist in hacking form, originating from Malaysia, known for usually potentially politically motivated attacks. Now, what we've seen is they're leveraging ransomware as a service tools, which obviously I'll talk about later, to deploy ransomware, and their sort of means of entry is typically social engineering. And from an impact point of view, again, this has probably changed since this was at the time of writing, but M&S estimated, a revenue loss of, £1 million per day and 750 million in shares. So obviously it's quite a big thing. So let's take a deeper look now. What are we seeing? The emerging trends and tactics that we're seeing. So I've broken this down into 3 areas. Ransomware, because that's the boogeyman, that's the thing that most people are afraid of. We've got vulnerability attacks. Again, this has been mentioned multiple times in the statistics. And then we've got identity-based attacks. Again, social engineering, phishing, all the things that have been mentioned there. So starting with ransomware. So how bad is ransomware, as a problem? What are the numbers? So the image that you're looking at right now was taken from a website called ransomlook.io. You can go and view that on the public web. You don't need to go on the dark web to be able to view that. And basically what you're looking at is the numbers that are curated from the posts by the ransomware group. So if I'm a ransomware group and I hack you and I post that on my website saying I've hacked company X, that is what then counts towards this. So as you can see here, we've got hundreds of posted attacks. Clop alone have over 250 at the time of writing, which was about 3 weeks ago now. And if you go to any of these pages, the way that they operate effectively is they will post some details about the company, so some headline details about what the company does, turnover, staff, that kind of thing. And then they will typically post something that they've got from that. So that could be proof of breach, passport photos is quite common on there, confidential files, anything that's going to shame you into making that payment. Now, ransomware is massive right now. We're here in 2025, but ransomware has actually been around for a long time. When I started looking into ransomware some time ago now, I was actually surprised to find out that ransomware was first discovered in 1989. So it was written by a chap called Joseph Pop, where he emailed 20,000 floppy disks disguised as a questionnaire to attendees of the World Health Organization's HIV conference, and the disk obviously contained a malicious software that encrypted files and obviously demanding a ransom to make that payment. So we've got an old problem, but it's been made much bigger now, as we talked about, because of that bigger attack surface area and the amount of data that we effectively hold on our clients and everything else, personal information. So what I want to do is take our attention and look into these ransomware groups. So we're going to have a look under the lens. Now, this is not something that you can often do, to be honest. We get information from frameworks like MITRE-ATT&CK about the techniques that they would maybe use, but you don't get to understand the group structure and things that are going on. But we've had recent events with a group known as Butler, where they've provided us a unique opportunity to delve into those operations. So we've got information about the tactics, we've got information about the infrastructure, and we've got some of the internal communications. So before I get into that, let's just talk about who they are. So Black Bastard was, or is, we believe they're disbanded, a professional cybercrime ransomware as a service operator, responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of attacks globally. They use what's called the double extortion tactic. So again, people are familiar with ransomware and probably understand that they will encrypt your files. But what the ransomware gangs obviously understood is that people have good backup strategies and are able to recover from that. So to make sure or increase the chance of them getting money, they also exfiltrate data out of the network and they publish it on those sites that I talked about that I curated that detail from. Victims range from manufacturing to financial. In fact, there was lots of verticals, and again, I'll cover that from the chat logs. Obviously, attacks can cripple operations, leak sensitive data, and there's financial and reputational damage. We can see from the logs that email-based attacks is typically where they would go in, stolen credentials or unpatched systems, again, things that have come up in the statistics. And obviously, ransom demands can be in the millions of pounds. They typically try to understand the organization, look at the turnover, and then they make a call based on that. So let's take a look at these chats. So firstly, the chats, how did they come about? So in February 2025, an individual under the alias Exploit Whispers basically compromised the group's Matrix chat system, and then he posted all 200,000, I believe it was, messages on a Telegram chat. So what we've done is comb through that information, because obviously there's lots of nonsense that's in these chats, to try and get some of the interesting bits. So what we can determine from that is that there was a group organizational structure. So we had, the hierarchy, and there's some notable members in there. There was a chap called GG, or Tramp, identified as the leader. There was someone called YY, or Bio, who was identified as maybe an administrator in tool development. And then the last person, we had someone called Tinker, who we believe responsible for spam and phishing. So again, this is just 3 people I've mentioned, key members in there, but there are, at least tens or hundreds of people working in this organization. They had a targeting strategy. So they like to focus on high value targets, finance, manufacturing, and energy. And they also try to avoid either countries where there was legally challenging problems with payments. So, some countries have don't negotiate with terrorists, and this could be formed as some form of terrorism. So they will not negotiate, they will never pay. So let's not concentrate on there. And they also try to avoid things like healthcare to evade political and law enforcement pressures. However, that didn't stop that from happening. So the Ascension incident was effectively, Ascension is a healthcare breach. And after that, they issued a free decryptor. And we can see through the chats that they actually talked about, should we rebrand, obviously continue the same thing, have a different name out there, start again, because of all the heat that came with it. So there is some interesting things that you're seeing around that. Negotiation approach. So if anyone here's got incident response, you may or may not know, but as a part of incident response, one of the tasks that they will do is, if you do want to pay, they will negotiate on your behalf, right? Because the payment will start here, and hopefully you'll get it down to something like that. And again, we know some groups are more likely to negotiate than others. What these guys effectively did was try to bypass negotiators. So they would look at the company infrastructure, try to understand who they needed to speak to bypass these negotiators to try and get more money. There was exploration of AI. There was interest, I suppose. Members were using ChatGPT for malicious activities, generating phishing emails and things like that. But it was not widely adopted. They were using more as a service type operations. And then, very interestingly, there was connections to Russian authorities. So the leader that I talked about was detained in Armenia in June 2024, and there is some suggestion within the chat logs that he contacted some high-ranking officials to facilitate his release through what's referred to as a green corridor. So I guess in summary, we've got this high-profile ransomware as a service group focusing on specific sectors, making sure payments are made with skipping negotiations and having call scripts, and obviously having a good structure there, right? But they are not the only people that have this kind of structure. So again, this is another group called Conti. For those people that may remember Conti, Conti was the biggest ransomware as a service provider or group at one point or another who were disbanded. Now, the reason that they disbanded is because, or all this information was made available, is because they were primarily Russian-based, but they had Ukrainian members working as a part of that. And when the war started, they obviously put themselves forward to say we support Russia, and forgot that they had people working from the Ukraine from there. What that meant is that the Ukrainians that worked for them leaked a lot of information, and this allowed us to have this look under the lens of the group Conti, who were known for hacking the Costa Rican government. So as you can see here, we've got a group structure, we've got a boss, we've got training departments, we've got blog negotiators, we've got blockchains, and we've got teams split up into different, skill sets: developers, pen testers, open source intelligence, admins, offensive teams, and reverse engineers. We believe they had roughly 80 to 100 employees. We can see that we had these attack teams divided into 3 groups, and they had an average salary of around $1,800. Go and have a look at Glassdoor. You'll see that's higher than the average Russian developer. And, the interesting thing for me is they've got a HR department. Now, I cannot for the life of me picture what a conversation with the HR department of a group that hacks people for a living looks like, but they had that sort of structure. So you look at this, you would think this is any organization you could work for. They are set up the same. So what we're effectively dealing with is organized crime. And I don't know if you're watching things like Mobland or you've watched any of the old mob films. If you think about it that way, but if you think the structure being a family and take that away and just as a boss and there's different things, it's very similar. And, the reason they're doing this ultimately and the way that any of them do it is because it pays. Does it pay well? Well, if you look at this chap here, which is Maxim Yakubets, who was a leader of a cybercrime group called Evil Corp, then I'd say crime pays pretty well. So he still remains at large, despite a multi-million-dollar reward for his arrest. But you can see it from his lavish wedding, all funded by cyber theft, or the wads of cash, or most notably the customized Lamborghini, of which the license plate said the word thief. That crime pays quite well. Now, we've talked a lot about ransomware as a service, and I think we understand ransomware, but what is this ransomware as a service concept? So let's just take a look at that. So firstly, ransomware as a service, I've kind of broken this into 3 different areas. Now, it could be that they are all the same people or all the same group, or it can be completely different groups or individuals doing this. So starting in the top left, we have the access broker. Now, an access broker, the job or duty of an access broker is ultimately to compromise a network. So once you get onto the network, you get that persistence in the system, so you're not getting kicked out of it. That's the point where the access broker can either sell that on the dark web. I've got access to ARO. Would anyone like that? Or they would pass that on to the ransomware affiliate, who may be part of the same group. Now, the affiliate is, I guess I'm going to call them the doer. They're the people that will move laterally in the network, so understand what you've got in there. They will make sure they persist on systems. But the main thing they're ultimately going to do is that double extortion method that I talked about. So they're going to exfiltrate that data, and they're going to run that ransomware payload. But how do you get the ransomware? How do I go and find ransomware to go and deploy anyway? And that is where the ransom as a service operator comes in, and it's their job to build the ransomware. They build a leak site. They will process payment for you. They will do victim messaging. They will maintain the ransomware. They will upgrade the ransomware. A lot of it's been rewritten in Rust because that runs on low CPU resource, so they can do 20,000 messages a second or whatever it is. This is what the ransomware as a service operator does. Now, should you make a payment, so someone pays, the way that effectively works is the ransomware as a service operator gets that money, and then the affiliate is then paid from that. So if you just imagine a day, you get on the internet and you decide you want to, do some, ransom a company, you could go onto a website. If an access broker has already gained access, you could buy that access into it. You could then run the tooling that an affiliate will do, and we'll get onto that in a second. And again, you will get a lot of help from the ransomware as a service operator in doing so. And then from that point on, you leave it to these, highly skilled ransomware as a service operators who will publish that. So when we looked at that page, and hopefully people can remember that there was Klopp potentially as being the #1 in there. It may not be that Klopp themselves have done that. It may be that multiple different affiliates and multiple different access brokers were a part of that. But the way that or the place that it gets published is on Klopp's website as the ransomware as a service operator. So just to have a look into what an affiliate does, I've taken a look at another group called Ransom Hub, maybe not as exciting a name, but I've picked them because they're quite new. So they emerged in about February 2024. They've got a victim count of around 200 to about 800 now, at least 227 at the time of writing, but we believe a lot more that just never made it onto the website. And in March alone, they were the highest, with 60 known ransoms on companies effectively. So what I've done is align this to a framework called MITRE ATT&CK. Just to give you a very brief on what MITRE ATT&CK is. So MITRE ATT&CK is a framework that aligns itself to the tools, techniques, and procedures of a threat actor. I always like to use a bank job as an idea to kind of explain this. So if you start with initial access, how do you get access to the bank in the first place? Get past the door security. Privilege escalation is you getting the key card that allows you into the different parts of there. You maintain persistence, obviously make sure that you're in that building, and ultimately you want to get down to that vault, get the privilege to be able to open the vault and take the money out of it. And it's not too dissimilar in a cyber sense. So initial access, how do we get access to it? Ransom Hub is known for using spear phishing voice or phishing. They've got compromised VPN accounts is another thing. And by the way, this is not a definitive list. This is just things that they are known for. The next thing, we've got a CVE. CVE, or Common Vulnerability and Exposure, is basically a publicly disclosed vulnerability that's been assigned a unique identifier for tracking purposes. That one there is something called zero logging, which I'm sure some people will remember, which was basically a critical vulnerability in Windows, and it basically allowed you to get domain admin in seconds, effectively. Persistence is next, so creating local accounts. The discovery concept is, understanding what's on the network, scanning out there so that I can know what I can target. Credential access, Mimikatz is the one that most people will be familiar with. If you've ever kind of started a red team call, a great tool for kind of stealing hashed credentials on machines. And again, we've got another CVE, another vulnerability here. This one was associated with a Veeam backup that allowed you to capture credentials from actual backups. Command and control, AnyDesk, any tool that you can think of that allows you to remote onto a machine and then perform actions is command and control. PSExec, an old executable command line that allows you to remotely run commands on other machines. Lots of defense evasion, lateral movement using things like Xcopy, again, common things that you may do, SMB spreader. And we get down to the impact, which is the ransomware and the exfiltration. And they typically use a tool called rclone. Probably something to look at is, do you want to application block rclone? Because not many people use it as a legitimate source. The problem, of course, we're trying to do that is if you block rclone.exe and I rename that and get past it, so the cleanest way is to do the hash. And every time that gets updated, that hash changes. So typically it's quite hard to kind of block on an application level. Now, we have talked a little bit about vulnerabilities, and again, thanks to the leaked chats that we got from the group, we've been able to see just one group and the vulnerabilities that we're using. So within that, there were 62 CVEs mentioned, which is a large number, right? 53 of those, if you go to vulnerability check, were known to be exploited, and 55 of them have a proof of concept available. So maybe haven't been, 2 of them haven't been exploited yet, but there is a proof of concept. Now, I guess interestingly and unsurprisingly, Microsoft makes up the main of this, being the largest operating system that the world uses today. It was going to be the heaviest thing in here, but you can see other things in here: Chrome, WinRAR, there's email, and there are multiple different firewall vendors. And in about February of last year, our friends at Arctic Wolf had what they called a major event, where there was a breach in a Palo Alto that allowed you to bypass the VPN. Obviously, a VPN allows you to teleport a device onto that network, and they were, running even harder than normal to make sure that they stopped that. So again, patching of known vulnerabilities is such a critical thing that you need to be doing in your organization. And sometimes you can be unlucky. Proof of concept comes out on a Saturday, and you don't go back into the Monday, which happened with a NetScaler vulnerability once upon a time. But most of the time, these things come out as a CVE. The vendor will patch it before it gets to proof of concept. So making sure you're patching is really important. And then lastly, we've got identity attacks. Now, I had a conversation with ChatGPT about this, and you can actually see point in time, was it November, I believe, in 2022, when ChatGPT was made, that there's been a 40% increase in phishing attacks since that has been created. Now, if you can remember before the use of AI, and think about some of the phishing attacks that used to come through, there was really common ways to, there was tonality issues, broken English, things that made it really obvious that it was a phishing email. We're at a point now where, I can speak a completely different language and ask it to write an email in a certain tone as if I'm from a certain business, and it will write it as long as it doesn't think I'm using it for, nefarious reasons. Social engineering, of course, we talked about this in M&S, but, if you understand an individual, attacking a person is easy, right? Because it's human psychology. If you speak to me at 9 o'clock at night, I'm going to be different to 9 o'clock in the morning. That's the problem with humans, right? They're at the weakest point. So they're exploiting that. They understand that identity is a highly valuable target to get hold of, whether to sell that. We talked about those access brokers, and they're continuously evolving. Now, for me, we talked about the concept of a perimeter for a long, long time. So way back when, I used the analogy of a castle and the walls and all that kind of stuff. But we just don't live in that world anymore. I can work from just about anywhere. So for me, identity is the new perimeter. I just want you to think about your journey to work on a given day, and I'll use mine this morning. I woke up, probably looked at my phone, probably logged into multiple different things before I'd even left the house. I got into my car. My car understood I was me because of my identity and put the seat position in a certain way. I went to the gym. I logged in, put something into a keypad. That was an identity again. And then got into work, logged into a computer, had to access the building with a pass, various different things. It's all identity. So if you think about the thing that follows you around the most and allows you access to things, it's that identity. So for me, securing identity now is paramount. That leads me very nicely on to AI. So AI, I'm sure people have played with ChatGPT or Gemini or various other things in here. It's a buzzword at the moment, but how's that sort of being used in cybersecurity? So I guess the first question I've got, and obviously I can't see what people are saying, but should we be using AI? And if anyone put no, rethink a little bit. For me, the answer is yes, because the world already is. And if you've been around as long as I have, look at the hairline, you'll understand that, at some point in time, businesses that didn't adopt for what was the boom of the internet may either not exist right now, or they are a small thing on the high street because they didn't want to join the Amazons of the world. And now look at what Amazon is today. This is what I see AI as right now. So it's reshaping the cyber battlefield on both sides. I think, look at the attackers, they're rapidly adopting AI to scale. They're using it for automation, they're personalizing threats, they're using it for multiple different ways. You can write malware with it these days. Defenders, we need to stay at pace of this. If we fall behind, detection response, you just can't stay manual. I'm sure you've got protection things that are very much signature based within your protection stack, and they still hold value. But we need to be looking at AI now because things are adopting and moving in real time. Adopting AI doesn't mean replacing people. It's about augmenting decision making and response. And basically, take my little, you can take that away with you. AI is not going to replace cyber teams, but I believe that teams using AI will outperform those that don't. So let's just take a look in both lenses here. So starting with the bad guys, how are they using AI? The top one there is the scary one for me. So 2024 UK-based CEO was tricked into transferring 20 million after receiving a realistic AI-generated voice message mimicking the CFO. Now, I don't know if anyone's got VO, Gemini's new text to video tool, but we're at a point now where deepfakes are becoming more and more common, and it's going to become a problem. I've seen now that some families who are concerned about this because someone's been attacked by it have passphrases, and businesses have passphrases. So if you want to send a large sum of money between person A and person B, you have a passphrase just to qualify they are the person that's speaking to them. So again, something quite scary. AI-powered malware. Malware is now adopting in real time. So if it can talk back to home and it gets blocked somewhere on that MITRE ATT&CK kill chain that I referred to, it can talk back to home, refer to the AI and say, I'm stuck here, what else can I do? So it's able to adopt in real time. Social engineering, again, I'm sure we all know how to kind of find someone on the internet, but how much easier is it when you want to find information about an organization? You can use AI. Who is ARO? Who are the key individuals that I would need to talk to? Can I get the email addresses? Can you give me information about the organization? And you are suddenly working through and crafting a spear phishing campaign to use in that organization in seconds. It's that simple. And then password guessing. So there's been tools around for a long time now that can crack passwords. John the Ripper is one that people may have come across. But if you can get common structures of lead databases and put that into AI, it can guess common passwords. So again, AI has all this power behind it, and they're now just starting to use that. So I see this like not being like this, more like a hockey stick. I see this is just going to ramp up more and more. But on the other side of it, we're doing the same in cyber defense. So we talked a lot about emails. Again, I'm sure you have something filtering emails at the moment, the known bad, the signature stuff. But where AI works in the defense side is understanding what does good look like, what's normal for your organization. So email AI can, understand the tone. I always say thanks, Adam, not regards, that kind of thing. The structure of emails, the grammar, the metadata, and then it can understand deviations from that. So identifying phishing, spoofing, or malicious payloads. We've got anomaly detection in user behavior and network behavior. So again, like, are we seeing unusual logins from unusual countries, different times, file access, data transfers in real time? AI is able to kind of understand this. Predictive threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is a unique skill that people need to go out and gather all this information. Being able to reach out to multiple different things and pull it all together just by the way you structure a query into an AI is completely changing how threat intelligences work now in the defense space. And lastly, the automated response. So something bad happens, machine learning is understanding there's been an abnormal behavior, and it's now able to make actions where it can kill processes, roll back unauthorized changes, all without human interaction. So that's where we are with EDRs and the likes of that these days. So I've talked a lot about, I guess, what's happening in the threat landscape, and things are looking not so great. How can we kind of combat that, and where do we start? And that's where defensible by design comes in. So what do I mean by that? I mean utilizing a framework. So just to be clear, a framework is different from things like Cyber Essentials or NIST2. What those are is an accreditation to say you've met a certain prescribed specific controls. The way that a framework works is it's there to guide you rather than to say you have to do something in a certain way. Now, there are many that you can utilize. I myself use NIST, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the UK has the NCSC's Cyber Assessment Framework, or CAF, and that's a nationally recognised framework that you can look at. But the good thing about these frameworks is that they provide you with that foundation to understand what are you trying to protect, how well are you protecting it, and the most important thing is what happens if something goes wrong. And I'll touch on that when I look at NIST, because again, people focus a lot on the protection and not so much about what happens when something does go wrong. So once you have got a framework, then what do you do with it next? And the next thing is mapping that environment to that framework. So ultimately, understanding your environment, aligning that to the processes, the controls and responsibilities, to the core functions of the framework, and understanding, importantly, what you're doing good. It's not that everyone's doing everything badly. I'm sure there are lots of things that everyone's doing good, but the good thing is it's going to identify where maturity is low or where controls are completely missing. Now, as I mentioned, we utilize NIST, and I get asked quite a lot why NIST and why not CAF or whatever. I think people get too hung up on this ultimately. I think that there are similarities. They obviously have different core functions, but they have similarities. It provides you with a foundation. Now, just to kind of look at us and a high level look at NIST here. So identify as a function is for you to understand what you have in the organization and what are the risks associated to that. If I look out my window, I'm at the top of a hill. I don't think I'm at risk of a flood, so I'm probably not going to get flood insurance. If I live very close to a river, I'm going to look out my window and see it differently, right? So identifying is understanding what you have and what are the risks associated with that. And vulnerability management and understanding that comes close to this. Protection is the doors, windows, and locks, right? The thing that stops people getting in. But we know that that's not good enough, and we know people bypass that, as we've seen that within the stats. And that's where your detection comes in. So, the alarm system, your camera system, as another analogy. And the reason why we want to do that is we want to respond quickly, die the fire out, get the person out, whatever you want to refer to it as. And then obviously recovery is getting everything back to a function or a place in time before the attack took place, using your backups and all those processes you put in place. So once you've got a framework and you've aligned yourself to it, the common thing that comes after that is what now? How do I prioritize? And this is where you go back to the threat landscape and overlay that. So here's my gaps, overlay the threat landscape, what's being exploited in the wild, what's being targeted, and then work through that. If you believe you've got a gap for social engineering and phishing, then start looking at machine learning driven email protection and those aspects. If you're concerned about ransomware, look at a robust EDR or an MDR or some last line containment. Exploited vulnerabilities, have a solution that identifies what needs patching and have a patching program or a solution that will patch on your behalf. Identity-based attacks, MFA, the usual good stuff, and respond and recovery. make sure you've got an incident response plan. If I can give you one piece of advice from this, make an incident response plan, test it, and make sure you've got playbooks against that. Now, last bit from me before I just do a summary of everything. So some looking forward and some calls to action. So predictions, it always gets a bit vague, like hazy after a certain bit, but what I'm going to say is AI is going to continue to surge. So I'm going to see emails and attacks using AI as a kind of key part of that. MFA exploits are starting to rise now. I will tell you all to have MFA. The opportunist thief will not bypass MFA, but there are now solutions that either you do MFA bombing, where you just keep spamming someone with an MFA token until they click accept, or adversary in the middle attacks, where they basically steal a session cookie that allows them to log in, anywhere and on a different computer. So again, I'm going to see that. I believe we're going to see a rise in that. Supply chain attacks and deep fakes, we've talked about that, and I see that. Quantum computing is probably a bit more out there. I think that's going to be a longer period of time, but for those that understand current computing and zeros and ones, quantum computing can do anything between a 0 and a 1, so it can do things quickly. And there's a prediction that by, I think, 2034, that there's about a 30% chance that RSA 2048 will be cracked in 24 hours using quantum computing. Regulatory pressures are going to increase. We've seen that in the UK. There's more that we're being asked to do now. And obviously ransomware as a service, I can just see that evolving now, where they're going to start targeting data backups and recovery. So making sure you get a payment. So I've left you with 5 calls to action. Hopefully you found this useful. Starting with the frameworks. Pick a framework, again, NIST, CAF, or something else. Pick a framework, map your environment to it, and identify what those key areas of focus are. How we can support you with that, if you are stuck, you don't know where to start, we can offer a free complimentary cyber consultation. It takes roughly an hour at a high level, but then gives you those sort of key areas to focus on, and we can help you with building out a strategy to take that forward. Identity, have MFA. Make sure you've got MFA. Anything that's external, please have MFA enabled if possible. Conditional access policies, if you've got access to that, try using things like this. But as I mentioned, we can bypass that, and humans are a weakness still. So monitor identity, have something that's monitoring what's happening in identity, and we can support you with security awareness training. So if it's something you're not doing right now, you're not training your employees, testing your employees against phishing simulations, that's something we can absolutely support you with. Devices, if you're still using antivirus, and I know there's some people out there that they still are, start thinking that you need to move to an EDR. Unfortunately, antivirus being signature-based is just behind the curve now, and if someone gets into the environment, it's only a matter of time before they bypass that. So you need to be looking at EDR, potentially XDR, extended detection response, pulling telemetry from other sources, or looking at SOC solutions if you've got the budget to do so. As well as that, we talked a lot about vulnerabilities. Devices fits in that. If you don't have anything scanning, understanding vulnerabilities, and a patching program, please look at that. And again, we can help you. We've got numerous options for different consumption models. Please reach out to us and we can help you with that. Email, if you're getting emails that are bypassing the current filter, day on, every single day or every single week, your detection capabilities are not where you think they need to be, then again, please reach out to us. We've got AI tools. We can offer a complimentary email threat scan. The tool will use AI for the last 12 months of what's in your graph and tell you what is sort of sitting in the mailbox today. And then last, but absolutely not least, is ransomware, of course. So again, start thinking about ransomware as this big problem. How do you tackle that? Looking at things like I said, EDR, XDR, SOC. But if you have critical infrastructure and you are still concerned about this, we can offer a ransomware assessment. So we defang a ransomware. We can run that in your environment, and we can tell you whether or not your current controls are enough to kind of stop that. And we believe we've got a tool that looks as the last line of defense. Thank you all. Hopefully everybody found it useful. I've gone pretty much to time, but I will allow some time for those that want to stay for some Q&A.